The classroom on Kepler 7 station was packed with students from 12 different worlds. Blue-skinned Krillians sat next to insect-like Vorthax, while scaled Saurids shared desks with gas-breathing Nexari. All eyes were fixed on the large screen at the front of the room. Instructor Veltar's gill slits fluttered nervously as he changed the holographic display. His three-fingered hands shook slightly as he operated the controls. After 30 years of teaching xenobiology, this particular lesson still made him uncomfortable. Today we discuss the most dangerous creatures in known space, Veltar announced. His voice carried the authority of someone who had seen too much death. The Vorthax shadow beasts. A collective shiver ran through the classroom. Even the Vorthax, students whose own species was known for their warrior culture, looked uneasy. The hologram flickered to life, showing a massive creature that seemed to absorb light itself. 6 powerful legs supported a body the size of a shuttle. Crystalline spines ran along its back, each one sharp enough to cut through starship hulls. Its fur was so black it hurt to look at directly. Adult shadow beasts can grow up to 15 meters long, Veltar continued. They hunt in packs of 5 to 8. Their claws can slice through reinforced steel like paper. Their bite can crush a hover tank. But the adults are not what makes them truly terrifying. He switched to another image. This time the creature was smaller, only about 3 meters tall, but somehow even more unsettling. It was clearly young, but its eyes held an intelligence that made several students lean back in their chairs. Shadow beast cubs are in many ways more dangerous than their parents, Veltar explained. They are curious, fearless, and incredibly strong. A single cub has been known to destroy entire research stations simply by exploring. They do not understand their own strength, and they fear nothing. A Krillian student raised her hand. How many colonies have they destroyed, instructor? Veltar's expression grew darker. 47 confirmed attacks in the last decade. Over 12,000 casualties. The youngest victim was a Saurid child who tried to feed a lost cub. The creature accidentally crushed him while trying to play. The room fell silent. Even the usually chatty Nexari students stopped their whispering. The weight of those numbers settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. This is why, Veltar continued. Every civilized world follows the same protocol when shadow beasts are spotted. Maintain a minimum distance of 500 meters. Never approach their territory. And under absolutely no circumstances should you go near their cubs. He clicked to the next slide, which showed official Galactic Council warning symbols in bright red. If you encounter shadow beast cubs, even injured ones, even ones that appear abandoned, you must leave them alone. Call for military backup and evacuate the area immediately. Your safety, and the safety of others, depends on following this rule. A hand shot up from the back of the classroom. It belonged to a new student who had transferred in just 3 weeks ago. She was from one of the newly contacted worlds, though Veltar could never remember which one. Her species looked remarkably similar to Krillians, but with different skin tones and no gill slits. Yes, Miss Kim? Veltar said, reading her name from his roster. So-Ra Kim stood up slowly. She was shorter than most of the other students, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a strange warmth. What if the cubs are hurt? What if they have been separated from their pack and are dying? The question caught Veltar off guard. In 3 decades of teaching, no student had ever asked about helping shadow beast cubs. The very idea went against every survival instinct of every known species. You leave them to die, Veltar said firmly. It is the only way to ensure your own survival, and the survival of others. So-Ra tilted her head slightly as if considering this answer. But they are just children. A nervous laugh rippled through the classroom. Several students exchanged glances that clearly said this new species did not understand the reality of the galaxy. Miss Kim, Veltar said patiently, shadow beast cubs are not children in any sense that you would understand. They are killing machines that happen to be young. Their instincts are designed for hunting and survival. They cannot be reasoned with, trained, or helped. They can only destroy. So-Ra nodded politely, but something in her expression made Veltar feel uneasy. There was a look in her eyes that he had seen before, usually right before students did something incredibly stupid. I understand your protocol, instructor, Sora said. But on my world we have a saying, the smallest hands often need the most help. We believe that young ones, no matter what species, deserve protection. Your world has obviously never encountered shadow beasts, a Vorthak student clicked from across the room. Your saying would be, the smallest hands often cause the most death. Sora's mouth curved upward, in what Veltar had learned was called a smile among her species. Most other races found this expression disturbing, showing teeth like that. It looked too much like a threat display. Perhaps, Sora said simply, but I still think someone should try to help them. Veltar felt a chill run through his system. This was exactly the kind of thinking that led to tragic headlines in the galactic news feeds. Young, idealistic students who thought they could change the universe right up until the universe changed them into casualty statistics. Miss Kim, he said seriously, I want you to understand something very clearly. Shadow beasts have killed trained soldiers, experienced xenobiologists, and entire military units. The idea of helping their cubs is not just dangerous, it is suicide. Your species may be new to galactic society, but you must learn this lesson. Some things in the universe cannot be helped, they can only be avoided. Sora sat back down, still wearing that unsettling smile. I understand, instructor. Thank you for the warning. But Veltar did not feel reassured. There was something about the way she said it that suggested she understood his words but had not accepted them. As the class ended and students filed out, he made a mental note to keep an eye on the human transfer student. He had a feeling that Sora, Kim, and her species were going to cause problems. The kind of problems that usually ended up in the galactic obituary section. As Sora gathered her things, she looked once more at the image of the shadow beast cub still displayed on the screen. Its eyes looked sad to her, despite what everyone else said about killing machines and survival instincts. Back home on Harmony 3, her friend Tae-min Park was probably feeding the neighbor's lost pet right now. He had always been good with animals, especially the young ones that needed help. She wondered what Tae-min would think about shadow beast cubs. The emergency signals from Harmony 3 reached Galactic Council headquarters at exactly 0347 Standard Time. Nixara was pulled from her sleep pod by the urgent beeping of her communication device. As a Sarid observer for the Council, she was used to emergency calls, but this one made her blood run cold. Shadow Beast Pack confirmed on Harmony 3, the automated message announced. Human colony new soul at immediate risk. Evacuation protocols must begin within 6 hours. Nixara's scaled hands flew over her control panel as she called up the colony data. Harmony 3 was a frontier world, settled only 2 years ago by the newest members of galactic society, humans. The colony had about 3,000 residents, mostly families who had wanted to start fresh on a new world. She grabbed her emergency kit and headed for the transport bay. A shadow beast pack near a populated area meant only one thing: death. The evacuation fleet would need to move quickly to save any lives at all. The journey to Harmony 3 took 18 hours. During the flight, Nixara reviewed the standard protocols. Shadow beast packs usually claimed territory in a rough circle about 50 kilometers wide. Any settlement within that area would be attacked within days, if not hours. The creatures saw any large group of living beings as a threat to their hunting grounds. When her ship dropped out of hyperspace, Nixara expected to see evacuation ships surrounding the planet, taking on desperate refugees. Instead, she saw normal traffic patterns. A few cargo ships moved between the planet and the orbital station. Nothing looked like an emergency at all. This is Observer Nixara requesting immediate contact with New Sol Colony Administration, she broadcast as her ship entered the atmosphere. The reply came quickly, in the strange accent of human speech. This is Administrator Sora Kim. Welcome to Harmony the 3, Observer. How can we help you? Nixara almost dropped her communicator. Administrator Kim, you need to evacuate immediately. There is a shadow beast pack in your area. Why are your people still on the planet? There was a pause, then what sounded like laughter. Oh, you mean the cubs? Yes, they are nearby. But there is no danger, Observer. Everything is under control. Cubs? Nixara felt her tail twitch with anxiety. Administrator, shadow beast cubs are just as dangerous as adults. More dangerous in some ways. You must evacuate now. Observer, I think you should see something before we discuss evacuation. Sora said. Can you land at coordinates 124.7 by 89.2, just outside the town? Against all her training and instincts, Nixara programmed those coordinates into her ship. She had to see what was happening here. Maybe the humans were already dead, and something else was using their communication system. Maybe this was some kind of trap. She landed in a clearing about 2 kilometers from New Seoul. Through her ship's cameras, she could see the town in the distance. People were walking around normally. Children were playing in the streets. Nothing. Looked like a colony under threat from apex predators. Then she looked toward the forest, and her world changed forever. At the edge of the trees, 3 massive shapes moved slowly through the shadows. Even from a distance, she could tell they were shadow beast cubs. Each one was about the size of a ground transport vehicle. Their crystalline spines caught the sunlight as they moved. But they were not attacking the town. They were not even moving toward it. They were just watching. Like curious children peeking around a corner. As Nixara stared in shock, she saw something that made her question her own sanity. A small group of human children ran across the field between the forest and the town. They were laughing and chasing some kind of ball. The shadow beast cubs watched them play, their heads tilted as if interested. One of the human children kicked the ball too hard. It rolled toward the forest, stopping just a few meters from where the cubs stood hidden in the shadows. Nixara held her breath, waiting for the tragedy that would surely follow. The child ran after the ball, slowing down as he got closer to the forest. For a moment, boy and cub stared at each other across the short distance. Then, impossibly, one of the cubs gently pushed the ball back toward the child with its nose. The boy picked up the ball, waved at the cubs, and ran back to his friends. Nixara sat in her pilot chair, staring at the scene, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. Shadow beast cubs playing with human children. It went against everything she knew about these creatures. Her communicator crackled to life. Observer, this is Administrator Kim. I am walking toward your ship now. Please do not be alarmed by my companion. Nixara looked out her front window and saw Sora Kim approaching through the grass. Walking beside her was another human, a male with kind eyes and gentle movements. And following them, like a massive pet, was a shadow beast cub. The cub was even more impressive up close. Its void black fur seemed to absorb the sunlight around it. Its crystalline spines were easily as long as Nixara's arm. But those terrible claws that were supposed to slice through starship hulls were retracted. The creature's posture was relaxed, almost playful. Sora stopped a few meters from the ship and spoke through the external communicator. Observer, I would like you to meet Taemin Park, our xenobiologist. And this is Bomb, one of the cubs we have been caring for. The male human Taemin raised his hand in what she had learned was a human greeting. The shadow beast cub sat beside him like an obedient animal. This is impossible, Nixara whispered to herself. Observer, Sora continued. We understand this situation looks strange to other species, but I promise you there is no danger here. Would you like to come out and meet them properly? Nixara's training told her to stay in the ship, call for military backup, and report this as some kind of alien mind control situation. But her curiosity was stronger than her fear. Slowly, carefully, she opened the ship's door. The shadow beast cub turned to look at her as she stepped out. Its eyes were large and dark, with an intelligence that seemed almost familiar. But there was no aggression in its gaze, no threat in its posture. Taemin smiled at her, that strange human expression that showed teeth, but somehow conveyed friendliness rather than danger. Hello, Observer. Welcome to Harmony 3. I hope you are not too shocked by what you have seen. How? Was all Nixara could manage to say. That, Taemin said, gently scratching behind what looked like the cub's ear, is a very long story. But the short version is this. Shadow beast cubs are not the monsters everyone thinks they are. They are just children who lost their parents. And children, no matter what species, usually just need someone to care for them. The cub made a sound that was almost like purring. Its terrible claws remained safely retracted as it leaned into Taemin's touch. Nixara felt everything she thought she knew about the universe crumbling around her. Either these humans were the luckiest beings in galactic history, or they had discovered something that would change everything. "Observer," Sora said gently, "would you like to hear the full story?" Jin-Ho Lee, the colony's security chief, met them at the laboratory building in the center of New Seoul. He was a tall human with careful eyes and the bearing of someone used to protecting others. Unlike most security officers Nixara had met, he seemed completely relaxed despite having shadow beast cubs living nearby. "Observer Nixara," Jin-Ho said with a slight bow, "welcome to our little experiment in interspecies relations." The laboratory was unlike anything Nixara had expected. Instead of sterile white walls and cold metal tables, it looked more like a comfortable living space. Soft bedding was scattered around the floor. Food and water bowls sat in several corners. And sleeping peacefully in the center of the room was another shadow beast cub, this one even larger than Bomb. "This is Hanul," Taemin said quietly, so as not to wake the sleeping creature. "She was the first one we found." Nixara stared at the cub. Even asleep, Hanul was magnificent and terrifying. Her crystalline spines rose and fell gently with each breath. Her claws, which could supposedly cut through anything, were curled up like a house pet's paws. "How is this possible?" Nixara asked. "Everything we know about shadow beasts says they are killing machines." Taemin activated a wall screen showing video recordings from 3 weeks earlier. "That is what we thought too at first. But watch this." The video showed a forest clearing. At dawn, 5 adult shadow beasts lay scattered on the ground, clearly dead. Burns on their bodies and scorch marks on the trees suggested energy weapons. Near the adults, 5 cubs huddled together, crying out in distress calls that sounded heartbreakingly sad. "Hegemony raiders," Jin-Ho explained grimly. "They killed the adults for their crystalline spines, which are worth a fortune on the black market. But they left the cubs to starve." On the screen, the cubs tried desperately to wake their dead parents. When that failed, they began to wander, calling out for help that would never come. They were clearly lost, scared, and very young. "Protocol said we should stay away," Taemin continued. "Call it in to authorities and let nature take its course." But the video changed to show Taemin approaching the cubs with a bag of supplies. The creatures immediately adopted threatening postures, spines extended, making warning sounds. Any sane being would have run. Instead, Taemin sat down about 10 meters away and began to speak. Not in any language the translator could understand, but in the soft, gentle tones humans used with their own children. He placed food on the ground between himself and the cubs, then moved back and waited. "The first day they would not come near the food while I was there," Taemin narrated, "but they ate it after I left. The second day they let me stay while they ate but kept their distance. By the 4th day..." The video showed the smallest cub, barely larger than Taemin himself, cautiously approaching. Its spines were still extended, but its posture was more curious than threatening. It sniffed at the food in Taemin's hand, then very gently took it. "That was Bomb," Sora said, with obvious fondness. "She was always the bravest." Nixara watched in amazement as the video continued. Day by day, the cubs became more comfortable with Taemin. Their spines began to dim when he was near. They started to follow him around like lost children following a parent. "But how?" Nixara asked. "Every xenobiology text says shadow beasts are solitary hunters who trust no one outside their birth pack." Taemin smiled and gestured to the sleeping Hanul. "That is where the textbooks are wrong. Shadow beasts are not solitary hunters. They are pack animals with incredibly strong family bonds. They only appear solitary because they are so protective of their young that they drive away anything they see as a threat." He showed her brain scans of the cubs, pointing to areas that glowed bright blue on the display. "Look at these neural pathways. They are almost identical to what we see in highly social species. These creatures are designed by evolution to form strong emotional bonds, to protect their family members, to work together for survival." "Then why do they attack colonies?" Nixara asked. Jinho answered that question. Because colonies are seen as threats to cubs. Think about it from their perspective. A pack of shadow beasts finds a good territory for raising young. Then suddenly hundreds or thousands of alien beings show up, building structures, making noise, changing the environment. What would any parent do? Protect their children, Nixara whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. Exactly, Timon said. Every shadow beast attack on record has been near breeding grounds or cub-rearing areas. They are not hunting us. They are trying to protect their young from what they see as an invasion. As if summoned by their conversation, Hanul began to wake up. The massive cub stretched, yawned to show teeth that could bite through metal, then looked around the room. When her eyes fell on Taemin, her spines immediately dimmed to a soft glow. She rose to her feet, all 6 of them, and padded over to where the humans stood. Nixara took an involuntary step backward, but Hanul ignored her completely. Instead, the cub nuzzled against Taemin's side like an affectionate pet. She is asking for breakfast, Taemin said, rubbing the spot just behind Hanul's head where her spines met her skull. The cub made a sound that was unmistakably purring. This changes everything, Nixara said, still trying to process what she was seeing. If shadow beasts can form bonds with other species if they only attack to protect their young, then maybe, Sora said, the problem is not shadow beasts. Maybe the problem is that we never tried to understand them. Taemin prepared a meal, for Hanul, a mixture of synthesized proteins and minerals that the cubs needed for healthy growth. As he worked, he continued explaining his research. Shadow beast cubs go through several developmental stages, he said. For the first 6 months, they are completely dependent on their parents for food and protection. During this time, they learn to recognize who belongs to their pack and who is a threat. If they lose their parents during this stage, they can form new pack bonds with anyone who cares for them. He handed the food bowl to Hanul, who accepted it with the same gentle care Nixara might show to a fragile artifact. The key is approach, Taemin continued. You cannot come to them as a predator or a threat. You have to come as what humans call a caregiver, someone whose first instinct is to help, not to fear. And that instinct, Jinho added with pride, is something humans have in abundance. As if to prove his point, several human children appeared at the laboratory door. They waved to Hanul as if she was just another pet, and the massive predator waved back with one of her front paws. My people, Nixara said slowly, are going to think I have lost my mind when I report this. Probably, Sora agreed with a smile. But maybe it is time for the galaxy to lose its mind a little bit. Maybe it is time to try something new. Outside, the laboratory, Bomb and 2 other cubs were playing in the afternoon sun, watched over by human children who showed no fear at all. In the distance, adult humans went about their daily work, completely unconcerned by the presence of creatures that were supposed to be the most dangerous in the galaxy. Nixara realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. A colony where apex predators and potential prey had learned to live together in peace. And it had all started with one human's refusal to leave crying children, even alien children, to die alone. The news of Harmony 3 spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire. Within a week, ships from dozens of worlds were requesting permission to observe the impossible colony. The report seemed too fantastic to believe. Humans living peacefully. Alongside Shadow Beast cubs, Counselor Kethamol was among the first to demand a personal investigation. As a high-ranking Vorthak, he viewed the universe through the lens of cold logic and survival efficiency. The idea that apex predators could show anything resembling affection went against everything his species understood about natural order. He arrived at Harmony 3 with a full military escort and a list of very specific demands. If humans truly could interact safely with Shadow Beast cubs, they would have to prove it under controlled scientific conditions. Observer Nixara's report reads like fantasy fiction, Kethamol announced to the assembled human leadership. His insectoid features showed no emotion, but his forearms moved in patterns that indicated deep skepticism. I require concrete proof that these creatures are not simply waiting for the right moment to attack. Sora Kim sat across from him at the conference table, flanked by Taemin Park and Jin-Ho Lee. Through the window, several cubs could be seen playing in the colony's central park while human children watched with delight. What kind of proof would satisfy the council? Sora asked calmly. Kethmal activated a holographic display showing a forested area outside New Seoul. 3 Shadow Beast cubs were found yesterday, freshly orphaned by another raider attack. They have never seen humans before and are currently aggressive and frightened. If your Mr. Park can approach them safely and establish the same rapport you claim to have with your other cubs, I will consider your claims validated. Taemin leaned forward. These cubs have just lost their parents. They will be traumatized, scared, and defensive. It could take days or weeks to earn their trust. You have 2 hours, Kethmal replied without emotion. Under full observation with recording equipment and emergency containment fields in place. If you cannot demonstrate immediate positive contact, I will recommend immediate evacuation of this colony and military intervention to eliminate the threat. The test area was set up in a clearing 2 kilometers from town. Kethmal's people installed sensors, cameras, and energy barriers around a space about 50 meters wide. Inside the containment field, 3 Shadow Beast cubs waited in a makeshift shelter. These cubs were clearly different from Bam, Hanul, and the others back at the colony. Their spines remained at full extension, glowing with agitation. They paced constantly, making distress calls that echoed through the forest. When anyone approached the barrier, they adopted aggressive postures and made sounds that needed no translation. Stay away. Instructor Veltar had arrived from Kepler 7 station specifically to witness this test. He stood with the other observers, his gill slits fluttering nervously as he watched the proceedings. Despite everything he had heard about Harmony 3, he still expected this demonstration to end in tragedy. The subjects are clearly hostile, Kethmal noted as his assistants completed their preparations. They have already injured 2 of my handlers who attempted to provide food and water. Taemin studied the cubs through the barrier. They were magnificent creatures, even in their distress. The largest was nearly adult-sized, probably close to reaching full independence when the raiders struck. The smallest was barely bigger than a human child, its proportions still awkwardly young. They are not hostile, Taemin said quietly. They are scared children who have lost everything they knew. Their aggression comes from fear, not malice. Aggression is aggression, Kethmal replied. The reason does not matter if the result is death. Jin-Ho checked the emergency protocols one final time. If anything went wrong, stun weapons would fire through the barrier within seconds, and medical teams were standing by. Every precaution had been taken except the most obvious one, not doing this at all. Taemin picked up his simple supplies, water containers, food packets, and a basic medical kit. He wore no armor, carried no weapons, and showed no signs of fear as he approached the barrier entrance. Are you certain about this? Sora asked him quietly. Taemin smiled, the same expression that had puzzled Veltar weeks ago in the classroom. Children are children, he said simply. It does not matter what species they are. The barrier opened just long enough for Taemin to step through, then sealed behind him. The 3 cubs immediately focused on him, their spines blazing brighter with alarm. The largest cub moved to put itself between Taemin and the 2 smaller ones, clearly acting as protector despite being young itself. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. The cubs watched Taemin with suspicious eyes while he remained completely still. He did not try to approach them or make any sudden movements. He simply sat down in the middle of the clearing and waited. The observers outside the barrier held their breath. Through the sensors, they could hear Taemin speaking, though his words were too soft to make out clearly. Whatever he was saying, it was in the same gentle tones he used with all the cubs. Not quite human language, but the universal sounds of comfort and care. Slowly, very slowly, Taemin placed a water container on the ground and slid it halfway toward the cubs. Then he moved back and continued his quiet monologue. The largest cub approached the water cautiously, never taking its eyes off Taemin. It sniffed the container suspiciously, then took a tentative drink. The liquid was exactly what the cubs needed. They had not had proper water since their parents died. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The cubs remained wary, but their spines had dimmed slightly. The constant pacing had stopped, and their distress calls had quieted. Tae-min offered food next, the same way he had with the water. This time, the smallest cub was the first to approach. It was clearly the hungriest, and its need overcame its fear. As the small cub ate, Tae-min began to move slightly closer. Not directly toward the cubs, but at an angle that would bring him within a few meters. The cubs tensed, ready to flee or fight, but Tae-min's movements were so slow and unthreatening that they did not trigger a panic response. Impossible, Kethmol muttered, watching the displays that monitored the cubs' stress levels. Their defensive reaction should be increasing, not decreasing. 1 hour into the test, something remarkable happened. The smallest cub, having finished its food, began to approach Tae-min rather than retreating. Its siblings called out in warning, but the little one seemed drawn by curiosity rather than deterred by caution. Tae-min remained perfectly still as the cub came within arm's reach. It sniffed at him, clearly trying to understand what kind of creature he was. Then, in a moment that made several observers gasp, the cub gently touched Tae-min's hand with its nose. The contact lasted only a second before the cub darted back to its siblings. But that single touch had been completely peaceful. No claws, no aggression, no threat. Just a young creature trying to understand a potential friend. By the end of the second hour, all 3 cubs were resting quietly near Tae-min. They had not yet shown the open affection of Bam and Hanul, but their spines had dimmed to barely visible glows, and they were no longer making distress calls. When the barrier opened to let Tae-min out, the cubs watched him go with what could only be described as disappointment. Kethmol stood in silence for several minutes, processing what he had witnessed. His entire worldview had been challenged by a single human sitting peacefully with creatures that should have killed him. This changes the entire paradigm of interspecies relations, he finally said. If apex predators can form peaceful bonds with other intelligent species, then maybe, Veltar added, his voice filled with wonder, we have been approaching the problem from the wrong direction for centuries. As they prepared to leave the test site, Kethmol made a decision that would reshape galactic policy for generations to come. I am recommending to the Council that we establish a new research initiative, he announced. We need to understand how humans accomplish what no other species has managed. If this technique can be learned and taught, it could revolutionize how we handle dangerous wildlife encounters across the galaxy. Tae-min looked back at the cubs one final time. Tomorrow he would return with proper supplies and begin the patient work of helping them heal from their trauma. In a few weeks they would probably be playing with Bam and Hanul in the colony's park. But for now, it was enough that they were no longer afraid. 6 months after the test that changed everything, the Galactic Council chambers had never seen anything like the presentation about to begin. Representatives from over 200 worlds packed the Great Hall, all wanting to hear the official report on what the media had started calling the Harmony Protocol. Sora Kim stood at the main podium, no longer just a colony administrator, but now the official human ambassador to the Galactic Council. Beside her, Tae-min Park waited quietly, and behind them both, a sight that still made most observers gasp. Hanul, now fully grown but still gentle as a pet. The massive shadow beast had grown to nearly 10 meters in length, her crystalline spines gleaming softly in the chamber's lights. She could have destroyed the entire building in minutes if she chose. Instead, she lay peacefully behind the podium, occasionally purring when Tae-min scratched behind her ears. Honored representatives, Sora began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. 6 months ago, most of you believed that shadow beasts were the most dangerous creatures in known space. Today I want to show you why that belief was both completely wrong and perfectly understandable. She activated the main display, showing images from dozens of worlds where the Harmony Protocol was now being tested. On screen after screen, creatures that had once been classified as kill on sight were now living peacefully alongside various galactic species. The galaxy has spent thousands of years trying to fight, avoid, or destroy apex predators, Sora continued. We humans looked at them and saw something different. We saw what we see in all young creatures, beings who need protection, guidance, and care. Kethmol, now one of the strongest supporters of the new approach, stood to address his fellow counselors. His insectoid features had lost their earlier skepticism, replaced by what could only be called enthusiasm. The efficiency reports speak for themselves, Kethmol announced. Colonies using the Harmony Protocol report 0 successful raider attacks, 0 deaths from wildlife encounters, and complete ecological stability. The shadow beasts and other apex predators have become perfect guardians of settled worlds. The display footage showed exactly what he meant. A group of hegemony raiders approaching a human settlement found themselves facing not just human defenders, but a pack of adult shadow beasts who had grown up under human care. The raiders had retreated without firing a single shot. Instructor Veltar, who had traveled from Kepler-7 to give his testimony, took the floor next. His gill slits fluttered with excitement as he spoke. We have established the first interspecies xenobiology program on Harmony 3, he announced. Students from 47 different worlds are now learning what humans call compassionate contact protocols. The results have exceeded all expectations. The display showed clips from the new academy. Krillian students were learning to approach injured predators with medical supplies instead of weapons. Vorthak warriors were being taught that sometimes the strongest action was gentle care rather than aggressive force. Saurid scientists were discovering that many creatures they had studied from afar would actually seek out contact when approached correctly. The fundamental error, Veltar continued, was in our assumption that apex predators were fundamentally different from other social species. Humans showed us that the need for family, protection, and care exists across all forms of life, and Day, ambassador from the Centauri Collective, stood up, her crystalline form reflecting light as she spoke. This is all very impressive, but what about species that cannot be reasoned with? What about creatures that are truly dangerous? Taemin stepped forward to answer. Over the past months, he had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy, the human who could speak to monsters. Honored ambassador, he said respectfully, we have yet to find a species that cannot be reached through patient, caring contact. Even the most aggressive creatures usually become peaceful once they understand that we pose no threat to their young. He gestured to Hanul, who lifted her massive head at the sound of her name. 6 months ago, everyone in this chamber would have run in terror from a creature like Hanul. Today, she is probably the safest being in this room. She would die before allowing harm to come to anyone she considers part of her pack. As if to demonstrate his point, a small maintenance drone malfunctioned near the gallery, sparking and spinning wildly as it fell toward the crowd below. Before security could react, Hanul moved with incredible speed, catching the drone gently in her mouth and placing it safely on the floor. The chamber erupted in applause. The revolution we are proposing, Sora said as the noise died down, is not just about shadow beasts or apex predators. It is about changing how we approach the unknown in general. Instead of assuming threat, we assume need. Instead of preparing for war, we prepare for care. Nixara, now serving as the official observer for the Harmony Protocol, presented the final statistics. In the past 6 months, 23 different worlds have implemented some version of compassionate contact protocols. The results are consistent across all species and environments. Violence decreased by an average of 87%, while successful peaceful contact increased by over 200%. She looked around the chamber at representatives from worlds that had once considered each other enemies. The humans have shown us something remarkable. The universe is far more willing to be peaceful than we ever imagined. We just had to learn how to ask correctly. The final presentation showed footage from New Seoul's Central Park, where the sight that had once seemed impossible was now completely normal. Human children played alongside cubs from a dozen different apex predator species. Adults from various worlds worked together on common projects while massive, supposedly dangerous creatures napped peacefully in the shade. This is what the galaxy can become, Sora concluded. Not a place where different species fear each other, but a place where different species care for each other, where strength is measured not by what we can destroy, but by what we can protect. The vote was unanimous. The Harmony Protocol would become official Galactic Council policy, with training centers established on every major world. Taemin Park would head the new Department of Compassionate Contact, while Sora Kim would serve as the first director of Interspecies Family Services. As the session ended and representatives began filing out, many stopped to look at Hanul. The massive predator had curled up like a sleeping pet, completely relaxed in a room full of beings from species she had never seen before. A young Nexari student approached cautiously, clearly nervous but determined to overcome her fear. Hanul opened one eye, studied the student for a moment, then gently lowered her great head so the young being could reach her. The humans were right, the student whispered as she carefully touched Hanul's fur. She is not a monster. She is just very, very big. Taemin smiled as he watched the interaction. Size does not determine heart, he said quietly. The biggest creatures often have the gentlest souls. Later that evening, as the last delegates departed, Veltar approached Sora with a question that had been troubling him. Ambassador Kim, he said, I must ask you something directly. How did your species know to try compassion instead of force? What made humans different? Sora considered the question carefully before answering. I think, she said finally, it is because humans have always known what it feels like to be small and vulnerable. We remember being children who needed protection. When we see other young creatures in need, we do not see threats. We see ourselves. She gestured toward the window, where the lights of New Seoul twinkled peacefully in the distance. Every human carries inside them the memory of being helpless and afraid. When we encounter others in that same state, our first instinct is not to run or fight. Our first instinct is to help. Veltar nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Your species' greatest strength comes from remembering your greatest weakness. Perhaps, Sora agreed, but I prefer to think of it as remembering our greatest need, to be loved, protected, and cared for. Once we understand that need exists in all living things, the rest becomes much simpler. As Harmony 3 rotated toward night, children of dozens of species settled down to sleep, watched over by guardians who had once been called monsters. In the forest beyond the town, adult shadow beasts patrolled the borders, protecting their extended family from any threats that might arise. The instructors had shouted, "Stay away from apex cubs," and every species in the galaxy had listened. Every species except one. The humans had smiled, approached anyway, and asked, "What do you need, little one?" That simple question had changed everything.